So welcome to this edition of the Jerusalem class, or this talk series related to the Holy Land. And one of the biggest subjects we could talk about as Christians is trying to have some kind of objective teaching, history, and what is the different what are the different faces and background and current events of Islam. So just to go over this is the table of contents for those who have the handout, uh, the, the list of things that we want to cover, at least in a superficial way, by this teaching, or the founding of Islam and the life of Muhammad. And then maybe the biggest question, at least for me, do Muslims worship the same God as Jews and Christians? Wow. The five pillars of Islam, some vocabulary. What is the Hajj? What is jihad? What is the big schism, and among many little schisms in Islam between the Shia and Sunni Muslims? What are some of the dynasties, okay, that branch off after Muhammad? What are the demographics and spread that has to do with the jihad and the spread of Islam, but demographics today? And then how can we further dive in and read? So first of all, just generally, I'll move forward. So that was a recap of teachings before. Let's move forward to Islam means submission. And there you can see that sign of submission 5 times a day that a Muslim man will bow down and worship. Okay. The Quran, the sacred book of the Muslims, is a revelation to Muhammad dictated to scribes and contains the basis of the Sharia, the law which governs all aspects of religion and life. Whoops. Come on, advance there. Okay, and then this is the creed, huh? If you want to become a Muslim, all you have to do is say this. That's why I didn't write the whole thing out. There is no God but blank, and blank is the messenger of Allah. Okay. This is the Shahada, the creed, and really basic. And you might say that something that's attractive about this religion is its simplicity at the heart, right? That, by the way, is a picture of the mosque downtown Beirut, okay, right under fire today. And you can see right next to a church. Okay, the birth of Islam, the founding of Islam, began with, let's say, Muhammad was born in 570. Although the life of Muhammad, the first writing, you know, not just oral tradition about Muhammad's life, it wasn't written down for until like a couple hundred years after his life, which is why some of his life remains disputed. Okay, about 595, he marries Khadija, a rich businesswoman who was much older than him, and then he prays in a cave regularly as he's a businessman, and also somebody in their culture who is armed, so it's tribes that are always disputing in different ways. And he has vision, and the angel Gabriel visits him and uh, tells him to write, and starts dictating to him, starts giving him all these the different articulations that we have in the Quran. Okay, it's about 620. You might have heard of his night journey to Jerusalem. Okay, he had already had a regard to Jerusalem, and a lot of what he receives of religion is coming from Jews and Christians on the Arabian Peninsula, and which Jews and Christians who maybe had a mixed truth, maybe isolated Christians who may have been heretics as well. And so he does have a piecemeal idea of God and religion through Christians and Jews. And he also has allies with a Jewish clan right away, and then they reject him, and so but he has a lot of contact with Jews and Christians, and so And he does have a big respect for Jerusalem and the paradise that Jerusalem represents. He goes on a night journey, flies and on his miraculous horse, and who has a human head, and has many different revelations, among other things, the command to pray 5 times a day, or to pray many more times a day, and it gets reduced down to 5. In 622, he moves to Medina, battles against the Meccans, and so Mecca is a place where there's this mysterious shrine that is a center of Abrahamic worship, maybe one God worship, but also pagan worship and idolatry, and then a business that surrounds that in Mecca. So he moves to Medina and begins a battle against those Meccans and against their idolatry. 630, he has this victory in Mecca, destroys the idols of the KAABA stone there, and then he proclaims that we shouldn't make images. So he, in fact, says, we're not going to make images of myself or of God. And so that's why Islamic art is predominantly writing and flowery garden images. Yeah, question?
Father, what religion was Muhammad before he stood up?
Well, he's coming out of clans that had a pagan idolatry, but also some notion that had been shared in that area of the one God. And so there was a mix, and there were legends and surrounding the Kaaba stone, and so there's the tribal, different tribes and different clans who might be adhering to Judaism or to Christianity, and but a lot of them that were continuing different pagan idolatry worship. Okay, and then this victory in Mecca is the first of many, and he forms what he calls the Ummah, which is from the word mother, the community. He leads and leads out into conquest until his death in 632. And the Quran, some say the Quran was already beginning to be written down just after his death. Okay. Keep moving. Okay, I think it's really neat to see some of these images. I don't know if you ever opened up a Quran, but Muhammad himself was illiterate, didn't write, and so he dictated the revelations. And the revelations are in these, what they call surat, these little sections that don't have a whole lot of systematic order to them. And so it's really disorienting for us to pick up the Quran and say, wow, somebody's going to come to conclusions through this, because it just seems like a jumble of information and historical data and commands. And so it's really hard to give a systematic study of it, also because there's a respect of the Quran that's very fundamentalist, to say that it is what it is. We can't change it. We can't try too much to understand it or to systematize it. And so there aren't critical, it's kind of taboo to make a critical approach to the Quran, whereas for us as Christians, it's even hard for us to know where do we start? It's such a jumble of information. And so I'm going to dive right into the biggest question for me. Do Muslims worship the same God as Jews and Christians? And this is a picture of the Syrian church in the old city of Jerusalem. You can see the Syrian writing here, which is a Semitic language. So Arabic's the language that was already there in Muhammad's time, but wasn't written down until the Quran started being written. So there was kind of a written language that was invented of the Arabic tribal languages of Arabic. Okay, so the Arabic language in itself doesn't have a history to it, a literary history. It has a history of poems and recitations and songs, but a written down history begins with the Quran. But related languages like this Syriac, which is another Semitic language, or Hebrew, another Semitic language, So of course there's ancient writings in those languages, and so, it's hard to the Arabic culture is tribal nomadic culture. Okay, and there's a depth to that that's hard for us to understand. But there's so much memorization, poetry, song, oral tradition that goes on. But anyways, that's mixing with our traditions from the beginning of Islam, and we might say, okay, well, he's speaking of he's saying one God. There's only one God. Isn't that calling people to that one God that we worship as Christians and that Jews worship? And we know that anytime we look into heresy, we find a lot of good in it, and especially the notion of one God. And Muhammad says, okay, no Trinity. That doesn't make sense. But the fact that he says one God, isn't that the same God? And so there's a lot of, uh, I'd say, misunderstanding about how, if it's one God, it's one God, period. But what scholars, Christian scholars, Jewish scholars, or simply Aristotelians will say is no, there's different ways of understanding God. Even without revelation, we can understand God in radically different ways. For example, if you just say there is one God, what would be some fundamentals of what one God means? Eternal. What else? All-knowing, all-powerful, creator. Very good. So these might be things never ending. These might be things you could come up with without any revelation. But when you read Aristotle, like, wow, he understood a lot about God. And Aristotle says that there are five transcendentals we can say that will identify with God too, that he is one, that he is good, that he is true, that he is beautiful. Okay, now God being good, as Jews and Christians, uh, we want to say also the word love, and the word that he would be one who is coherent, who wants the good of his creation, not just creates it, but wants the good of his creation. He's someone who is true, who wouldn't contradict himself, right? And so, for example, if he is worthy of worship, of the honor of his creatures, we would say there's almost a natural duty of the creature to owe worship to the creator, right? Without even being Christian or Jew, without knowing who God is, if you knew that God was, you would say, well, if he is my creator, I owe him my existence, and so I honor him, right? And from which comes the prohibition from monotheistic religions of idolatry. Okay. Now, could God command us to worship idols? Okay, so there are certain Muslim scholars that would say, well, sure, he can command anything he wants. God is all powerful, and we can't understand God's will. Okay, whereas a lot of scholars would say, well, if that's the case, how could that be a God who is true and who is loving, right? And how could God command violence upon his creatures, right? So there are subtleties to this that I think as Christians we ask these questions as in the context of like the problem of evil. Why is evil in the world? Why is there suffering? Okay, but to approach these as would God command violence? Could God command the direct violence upon the innocent? This is something that for a Muslim he would say we owe obedience. We shouldn't question God. God isn't calling us to understanding. He's calling us to, what does Islam mean? Submission. Okay, so there's a fundamental difference in the nature of God that some Christian or Jewish or just Aristotelian scholars will say. And they say, I don't agree with that, their idea of God, and therefore it's not quite the same God they're worshiping. Therefore, perhaps we shouldn't permit ourselves to pray or to the honor the prayer of Muslims. Okay, these are deep questions about whether it is the same God. And so if you want to look at the sheet, there's a few quotes about this. Okay, This is straight from the Quran. Believe in God and his messengers and do not speak of a trinity, first of all, okay? And then, as I was saying, for Islam, God is almighty. His will may command anything. He transcends our knowledge so much so that we do not know his nature to correspond to our reason and love. We don't know if God's nature is, he's so transcendent that we don't know if his nature corresponds to my intellect. There's a Christian or Aristotelian would say that what is intellect in me is corresponds to the creator. There's something in me that is according to that image of God. My intellect corresponds to God's knowledge, okay, and to his nature, okay. In the Jewish scripture begins, in the beginning, God created. Okay, how does the Gospel of John begin? The beginning was the Word. So here the Christian revelation is affirming that God is Word, that God is perfect knowledge. And when I say word, that corresponds to who God is as perfect word. When I say truth, that corresponds to who God is as truth. Okay, and I wouldn't find those contradictions. Therefore, I can reason about God, and God wants me to reason. Part of my mission, part of what I should be doing to act according to my nature, which is created by God who is good and created in his image. One of the things we're supposed to do is to act according to reason, according to our intellect, and according to the way that intellect speaks to us deep down to how we should act, which we call conscience. Okay? Whereas in Islam, it seems that there often isn't that space for conscience. What your Islamic commander or what your imam says, you obey. You don't question. Jewish and Christian education, hopefully, is telling us to question about everything, reason through it. And John Paul II has an encyclical he wrote called "Truth Cannot Contradict Truth." Okay. He also has another encyclical called "Faith and Reason." Right? Question? Yeah.
And this is very basic. Do they believe that God is the God of Abraham, which the Jews would believe? We would believe that as a mono God. Do they believe that God is the God of Abraham?
Yes. Yeah, so historically we can say, oh, these are the three Abrahamic religions, great Abrahamic religions. There's others who are offshoots, right? The Islam does subscribe to Abraham and to an Abrahamic covenant. They even, the Sunnis even celebrate the big feast of Ashura, which celebrates the Exodus. Okay, so they are subscribing to a lot of Judeo-Christian history. And they consider, by the way, Jesus a prophet, and they honor the Virgin Mary, right? So, of course, they are saying Abraham is our father as well, but his great covenant and the sacrifice that God commanded and taking his son, who is the favorite son? Ishmael. Okay, so most of what we would say and the Jewish scriptures say about Isaac, they are saying about Ishmael, in fact, okay? And so there's a link that they have with this KAABA stone and the story of Isaac and Ishmael. Okay, I encourage you to read all of this section about the nature of God. It's pretty long. Okay, but I'm just going to read a couple parts of it on page 2. Okay, Aristotle, Judaism, and Christianity understand the nature of God to be eternal and immutable reason and love. We believe that God is reason and love. Man's principles of reason and the law of love and his conscience result from him being created in the image of such a God. And Benedict XVI quotes a polemic between the Byzantine Emperor Manuel II Palaeologus and a Persian sage around the year 1400. He thinks this is really pertinent to this question of nature of God. This Christian emperor says, "Show me just what Muhammad brought that was new, and there will you find things only evil and inhuman, such as his command to spread by the sword the faith he preached. The emperor, after having expressed himself so forcefully, goes on to explain in detail the reasons why spreading the faith through violence is something unreasonable. He says, why would we, if we want somebody to convert and find the truth, why would we force them into it? He's saying it's unreasonable to use violence. He's not saying don't use violence because it's violent. He's saying, why would you, if you really want somebody to truly convert, why would you use violence? Okay. Violence is incompatible with the nature of God and the nature of the soul. God, he says, is not pleased by blood, and not acting reasonably is contrary to God's nature. Faith is born of the soul, not the body. Whoever would lead someone to faith needs the ability to speak well and to reason properly without violence and threats. To convince a reasonable soul, one does not need a strong arm or weapons or any kind, or any other means of threatening a person with death. So Benedict XVI brought this up in his Regensburg address that was horribly controversial because he spoke these words in a way against Islam. And all of not just the Islamic world was mad at him, but the European world. They said, we need to be nice to Islam. Let's not upset them and contradict them. Okay, and Benedict XVI had the courage to say, wait a sec, what's going on here? And we should be able to speak. They speak of their differences very openly. We should speak of our differences as well, right? For Muslim teaching, God is absolutely transcendent. His will is not bound up with any of our categories, even that of rationality. God is beyond. Look out. Ibn Hazm went so far as to state that God is not bound even by his own word and that nothing would oblige him to reveal the truth to us. Whereas we would say, no, God is word. God is God of revelation. His nature moves him to create, moves him to reveal himself, and moves him to love his creatures, right? Okay, and then here are some quotes from this article that you can QR to get the full article. It's a long article that's promoted by the Knights of Columbus, by the way. Muslims worship the Creator, but they misunderstand his nature. Okay, and then there's this. This is the author Stout, who summarizes Benedict XVI, who's quoting his Regensburg address as well. Our understanding of the Creator, even by reason, is one that affirms his utter perfection and rejects everything contrary to this perfection. These perfections include truth and love. Okay. Skipping down, Thomas Aquinas, commenting on John 4. Anyone who believes that God is something that he is not, for example, believes that he's a body or something like that, does not adore God but something else, because he does not know him but something else. So that's leading us to say that, well, if they're not worshiping the true God, then they're worshiping something other than the true God. Okay. Muslims and the pagans accept neither the New nor the Old Testament. And so Aquinas is saying we need to appeal to their reason. We can't just say that scriptures contradict the Quran. We must have recourse to natural reason. Okay, even though Muslims say the religion isn't that reasonable, Muslims are human beings who have reason, and so we should appeal to the reason and have arguments. Okay, and so there's something very impressive about Muslims. When you sit down and talk, they are convinced and they have arguments. But they also have reason, and we should be able to appeal to something beyond those arguments. And I think we're pretty poor at this. Okay, so I encourage you to read the rest of this. And there's also a link to the joint declaration of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue. Okay, there's a council, an office. People who are always working on our dialogue with other religions. And by the way, that office doesn't take care of the dialogue with Jews, because we consider that dialogue with Jews is something apart and something that concerns more the office of Christian unity than the office of dialogue with other religions. Interesting. Okay, you can QR to see this, the conclusions they came up with, and I think it's interesting that they presented this to Benedict XVI, and he kind of signed off on it. So there are some things that they say, and that they got these scholars from Tehran to agree with. So in some way you can say, well, hey, there are some Muslims who are subscribing to God being reasonable. So you're welcome to read through these points. Okay, so I think this is sort of the heart of my presentation. I encourage you to read further on, both reading what is typed out here and hitting those QRs if you want to read further. Okay, but there's so many other things we want to talk about and other colors of this religion and people that we want to get into. So just to mention some vocabulary and see some pictures of some of this religion. There are 5 pillars of Islam, And first of all, saying that shahada, that statement of faith, that there is no blank other than Allah, and blank is the messenger of Allah. Okay. Praying 5 times a day. So that's pillar one is the creed. Pillar two, praying 5 times a day. Pillar three, giving alms. Okay. So if you ever meet Muslims, they're really awesome, especially during Ramadan. Like they're generous, hospitable people, and they live this out and sometimes put us to shame in their hospitality and almsgiving. Okay. Remember one time I was sitting outside of the shrine in Hebron, outside of the mosque side, and waiting for my pilgrims to go to the bathroom or something like that before or after we went in, and or we were waiting to visit actually because we had to wait for the Muslims to come out from their prayer. And I was in my habit and I had my backpack and I was just sitting at the bottom of the steps, and a Muslim from behind, a black Muslim, reached out his hand, grabbed mine, and put a US dollar into it because he thought it was a beggar to sit on the stoop. Um, Okay, but it's really inspiring sometimes. The Hajj, so once in their life, they're supposed to go to Mecca. And if you see pictures of the Hajj, it's really, sorry, I mentioned Sharia in the slide. And here's an image of them praying. So really touching too when you're walking around in a Muslim place. In the Holy Land, you'll see bus drivers like finish their route, get off the bus, throw out their carpet on the ground, and do their prayers. Or I was just walking by, this is in Lebanon, I was just walking on a country road on my way to St. Charbel's shrine, and there was a Muslim just praying in his yard. So really touching to see them pray and to hear, I think if it was live and not a recording, I think I would be moved by the muezzin, the call to prayer that goes out, but now it's a little bit of a public disturbance because they put them everywhere, even in Texas, trying to put the muezzin out, the call to the public call to prayer. That used to be somebody shouting out from the minaret, from the tower, these prayers, but now it's usually a recording. But so this is very controversial in Europe because they start to be really majority in certain neighborhoods, and they want to have their call to prayer.
New York City.
New York City, they're trying, right? Similar to church bells, but maybe a little bit different. Yeah.
So is it only men that have to pray?
Yeah, women will certainly pray, but men, just like in Judaism, men have an obligation, a daily obligation of a rhythm of prayer that women and children aren't bound to for obvious reasons, right? But certainly you see women pray, and a lot of times in a synagogue and in a mosque, you'll see the women's section off to the side or in back and screened off because we don't like to admit it as Christians, but we are distracted by women during our prayer. But we also have moved forward to say that's not as important, and so we'd rather have mixed seating. But traditionally, these cultures don't have mixed seating. I really love praying in a mosque because it's warm, and I love the architecture, and their architecture comes from Byzantine and Persian Christian architecture, and so I think it's okay for us to love their architecture and ambiance. I love their carpets. I wish we would do carpets and prostrations like they do. The way they prostrate themselves can remind us of how Christians used to prostrate themselves, monks would prostrate themselves. So nothing wrong to be touched by that. If you look at the carpet here, the oops, sorry. Gee, there's a slide that's missing on this one. As we learned last week, somehow all the slides don't come out through this computer. I don't understand. I'm on the same document. So I have a picture here of what's called at least for those on Zoom, this is called the mihrab, which is the alcove in the back of of every mosque that indicates the direction of Mecca, because they always pray towards Mecca. And then this little staircase up, which is where the imam sits when he does his Friday homily. Okay, and maybe also where they used to do a call to prayer. Okay, and then if you can see the little digital clock and listing on the left, those are the different times that they're supposed to pray because the times change each day depending on the sun. So sorry for those from in person. Okay, the Ummah, they have an incredible sense of hospitality and community. Like I said, and that's something that should inspire us too. And they have a principle in their religion that we used to have, which is that God touches all that we are. I think there's a Cartesian split or something in our Western, or just also wanting to have secular societies that are secular so that we're sharing between different religions and sharing with those who don't have religion. Great. But as Christians, I want my faith to touch all that I am and to give color to all that I am. And so there's a way when you see their society, and this is also true of a Jewish family, that the home is blessed in different ways, and there's a way that religion is gathering people and gathering community, and giving a rhythm to the day and to the week, and you see people living that out together in a way that's so inspiring. And speaking of hospitality, this is one of the moments that touched me. I was on that same walk to the shrine of Saint Charbel, which is 25 kilometers from where our house is in Lebanon. And I was getting pretty close, about 5 kilometers away. And so I had stopped. I think I tried to hitchhike a little bit on my way at the beginning, and I had stopped hitchhiking. But this family just pulled over and offered me a ride. I wasn't even hitchhiking. And they said, hop on. And I said, where? What? Honestly, they offered me a ride. But some of their simplicity too, I would say that reflects too, this is a Syrian refugee family living in Lebanon. And to see how the Western culture has made Christians in Arabic countries, from what I've seen in Lebanon and in the Holy Land, Christians see quality of life in material goods, whereas Muslims are really happy with manual jobs and with a much poorer and, let's say, even more dangerous life. They have this peace in their family, in their community. And so I don't know why. I don't think that's distinct of their religion, but I think somehow our Christianity has lost some of that culture that buoys the human person through suffering and through poverty, and that embraces things that are more basic, which is that I have an obligation to work, and so I'll be a mechanic. I don't need to have the highest paying job, that I would rather straddle continents to try to have an online job, so that I can make more money like most Lebanese, or I don't need to have a certain level of education to be someone. They have values that sometimes are more simple and lead to happiness. For me, there's a happiness and a peace that I meet in Muslims that I don't meet in Christians often in the Holy Land. So this is an example that they have these poor beat up motorcycles that they do their grocery shopping and take the kids to school on. Okay, of course, they have a calendar of feasts, which is inspiring as well. Ramadan is fast, and we see them really living, the kids love to fast during Ramadan. Okay, you see this, and then they party at night, right? Eid al-Fitr, which is the end of Ramadan, and then Eid al-Adha, that is Abraham's sacrifice of Ishmael, not of Isaac.
It's the same story, but they have Ishmael.
Exactly. The Prophet's birthday, and then Ashura, which this is a big difference between Sunnis and Shiites, which is the Sunnis will remember the Exodus story, the Passover, whereas for the Shiites, they'll celebrate the martyrdom of Hussein bin Ali, who is the son of Ali. So Ali, according to the Shiites, was Muhammad's successor, whereas Abu Bakr was, according to the Sunnis, Muhammad's successor. So Hussein bin Ali and his companions were massacred, and a big part of Shiite religion is to have this day of mourning where they have wailers and stuff like that. They all wear black, and they have these theater productions to remember the martyrdom of Hussein and his companions. And then a new Muslim holiday on the calendar, thanks to the Ayatollah, is Yom al-Quds. Quds is like kadosh, like holy. And so al-Quds is the way they refer to Jerusalem, the holy city, al-Quds. And Yom al-Quds, the day of Jerusalem, is the Muslim day of solidarity, where they want to gather all nations in solidarity against Zionism. Oh, great. That was March 13th. It's just a couple days ago. And this photo was from the airport in Amman, capital of Jordan. Yeah. Okay, Hajj, also really important. Hajj just means pilgrimage, walking with your feet, and they go to the Kaaba, which refers to this cube that's built around the black stone, and this mysterious black stone that used to be white, became black. Maybe is it a meteorite? This mysterious stone that they've always worshipped around in Mecca that has both pagan and monotheistic legends surrounding it. And the Hajj is really it's inspiring when you see that people who are rich or poor, whatever color, whatever country they're coming from, they all wear the same towel, the same garment as they're walking into the shrine and walking 7 times around the Kaaba. And they don't worship the Kaaba stone. They really say, no, this is just a place to direct our prayer. And but here you can see that men and women walking in this pilgrimage. It's really touching, right? And really a contrast to most of Christian pilgrimages. And Christians, when you see them on pilgrimage, it's like, okay, I'm fancy restaurants and hotels. And when I get to the place where I'm pilgrimaging to, what do? First, before the gift shop, I take a photo, right? Whereas this sort of pure sanctity, simplicity that surrounds the Kaaba stone, that I think can also be a reminder to us of what pilgrimage means, is to strip myself down and to the solidarity I have with others on pilgrimage, and the fact of walking. They have to walk this last stretch of it. Okay, and the black stone has different origins that I wrote more about on the sheet. I won't go into also some of the further vocabulary I mentioned there, but like you've heard words like halal. What does halal mean? It's kind of like kosher, right? It's their dietary laws, or the word mosque comes from masjid, Eid mean feast, imam. So, the jizya is interesting. As they were conquering, they would give people's 3 options, right? When they conquered a people, they would say convert or pay the jizya, the tax, or die. Okay, let's get to the good stuff. Jihad. Okay, this is my favorite book to learn about jihad, and I ordered these copies in case you want to buy these books afterwards or take them. And I forgot a couple of the books I was gonna, or I didn't forget them. I didn't have time because I went to the hospital. But Sword and the Scimitar, and these are on the end of your sheets as well, so you don't have to write it down. Tells the story of 6 battles in the history between Muslims and Christians, 3 battles that the Christians lost and 3 battles that the Christians won. And you'll learn things like how the American Navy was born. You know why? Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean, right? And they'd taken American hostages in North Africa. Jihad, what is jihad? And does that make you fearful? Does it seem to you ridiculous? Do you just say to yourself, well, Christians have gone to war in the name of religion as well. It's not so bad. Okay, these are some quotes from Muhammad. Lining up for battle in the path of Allah is worthier than 60 years of worship. Wow. I guarantee the martyr either admission to paradise or return with booty to whence he set out. Okay. Muhammad set out to unite everyone through the submission to the one God and subscription to the Quran, and uniting them by the Arabic language. There's this obligation. The Quran and Muslim worship should be in the Arabic language. And so you've seen maybe movies and stuff where kids are learning the Quran and just learning it in this way of memorization methods where don't worry about what it means, just memorize the text, right? And memorize it in Arabic, even if you have no idea what Arabic means, because you're living in Iran, or you're living in, what's the biggest Muslim population country today? Indonesia, right? Okay. So he founded this super tribe, the Ummah, something that would unite all peoples, and therefore this kind of divine right to go and conquer all peoples and to go past national and linguistic barriers. There's something beautiful about that, right? And something illusory, right? That we're just going to unite all peoples without going through the tough and long process of speaking the truth and looking for conversion of heart and mind, right? So jihad is Muslims. Sorry, I found this quote from Sword and Scimitar. The appeal, this is the second quote on bottom page 4 under jihad. The appeal of Muhammad's message lay in its compatibility with the tribal mores of his society. 3 in particular: loyalty to one's tribe, enmity for other tribes, and raids on the latter to enrich and empower the former. So he's saying, okay, maybe we can say that there was this vision of the Ummah to unite all peoples, but maybe there was also just a great excuse, a legit excuse, a divine excuse that we can go on war against the other tribe and loot them, which is what we really wanted anyway. Okay, he's saying that in some ways, however, maybe that wasn't Muhammad's intention. Maybe his intention was really the Ummah, but why did it succeed so well? Because these tribes wanted to make war, and that's something they really loved, was to raid each other, right? So he unites and they raid and swallow up each other and just end up swallowing up almost the whole world. Okay, 629 conquest of Mecca, 636 the massacre of the Yarmouk. Okay, how did they lose this battle? This powerful Byzantine Christian army. How did they lose the battle of the Yarmouk? So Yarmouk is a valley that separates Syria, Jordan, and Israel today, and it's steep slopes. And the Byzantine army, the only way we can imagine them losing this battle is that they were exhausted. Why was the Byzantine army and the Byzantine civilization exhausted? What had been happening for the past century? Persian destruction. They had been fighting the Persian Zoroastrians. Okay, it wasn't that much of a holy war. It was simply Persians who were out conquering everything. And the Byzantine Empire had been trying to defend itself. And so at that time, they had good leadership, but and the leadership, the church leadership in Jerusalem was really holy too. Saint Sophronius that we celebrated on the calendar last week. But the Christians lose this battle, and it's really a massacre, and they fall into this ditch, and that just lets in the tidal wave that doesn't stop. The conquest of Jerusalem, 637, conquest of North Africa. How quickly is that? They conquered all of North Africa. Do you realize how quickly they made it through all of Spain? Do you realize how how far up in France? 2/3 of the way up in France, and finally Charles Martel, okay, who was like grandson, nephew of Charlemagne. Finally, they beat the Muslims back at Tours and began this long Reconquista to push them over the Pyrenees and back into Spain. And yeah, it's hard for us to imagine. And sorry, this slide didn't come out too well, but oh, I think that's on another slide. Let me see. Yeah, sorry. Don't pay attention to the right, but I think that's a slide that I started and didn't finish. So the conquest leads really quickly to a world that has today 2 billion Muslims, okay, over a fourth of humanity, 7 million of them in Israel and Palestine, and so 20% of Israeli citizens are Muslim. Okay, 85% of Palestinians are Muslim, which I think that's exaggerated. I think it's a lot more than that. Exaggerated in the sense that maybe whoever did these figures thought there were more Christians, but I think there's a lot less Christians than that, than 15% of Palestinians. And you can see some of that expanse. I think the chart on the left is really interesting, seeing the timing and how quickly they spread around across Arabia and spread both west and east, right? And remember that in the east there were so many Christians to the east as well, and a Christianity that wasn't so united because some of them were considering each other heretics. But a lot of Persia was Christian at that time, and Christianity had spread into Mongolia, into India, and across the Caucasus, and so all of that became majority Muslim very quickly. Okay, and then we can see today the layout of how many Christians around the world. You see a lot of them in Indonesia, India, right, Pakistan, some of Africa. Okay. And sorry, this is some of the history that I was just reading off. You can read it really quickly. I'll just give a moment of silence since it's a lot of text. Okay, and I think it's good to revisit some of these battles that you've got several of them in here, both the losses and the wins, decisive battles, according to this author, who is a Middle Eastern Christian, Raymond Ibrahim, that for him, the six most decisive battles, so that includes the Battle of Hattin, where the cross of Jerusalem was lost, and it was that led to this was at the end of the Crusader kingdoms. And then, of course, in the Reconquista, the Battle of Lepanto. Has anyone read, I think it's called The Last Crusader or something like that? There's a kid's book about John of Austria, and the Battle of Lepanto, which leads to which feast on our Catholic calendar? Our Lady of the Rosary, right? And then the Battle of Vienna, do we realize if we had lost the Battle of Vienna, I mean, all of Europe would be Muslim today. So John of Poland, right? There's a Polish king who leads the defense of Vienna. Hey, so but then also yeah, you Muslim pirate raids. We realize what the Mediterranean was like before Islam. It was a place where there's all kinds of trade, and for centuries in the Greek world, there was a relative safety in the Mediterranean, and this author makes it really clear that for centuries, shipbuilding was really poor and commerce was really poor in the Mediterranean because there were Muslim pirates, and that was jihad. It was a way that the Muslims were able to have jihad was through piracy in the Mediterranean. This is what pushed Christian kingdoms to do what? To go explore around Africa in the other direction, because they had heard, well, there's Christians way off somewhere, maybe Ethiopians. How can we get to them without crossing the Mediterranean? Because we can't go past these pirates in these port cities. Let's just go around the Horn of Africa. And then America gets discovered on the way, right? So yeah, they were after spices, but a lot of the Christians were also after just other Christian lands or other lands that hadn't been Islamicized.
Who were the Moors?
Moors that was an early term, and I think even in the conquest of the Holy Land at the beginning in the 7th century, when they were called Moors, and I can't remember the origin of the name, but already in that time so that was maybe some kind of reference to those coming from the Arabian Peninsula, but I think already at the beginning they're calling Muslims Moors. Okay, some of the divisions in Islam, and the Sunni is, of course, the most populous, 85%, and related to Abu Bakr, the successor of Muhammad, who was Muhammad's friend and father-in-law. Shia Muslims, who is really all of Iran, much of Iraq, most of the Muslims in Lebanon, hence the connection between Hezbollah and Iran. And so there's some pictures, right? This is the leader of the Taliban today on the far left, and this is MBS, the new leader of Saudi Arabia with Trump, and this is Reza Pahlavi and Queen Farah, who were overthrown by the Ayatollah. And then here's the Ayatollah and his son, the new Ayatollah. And then, so then there's lots of heretics, right? Who is the famous Alawite family who was ruling Syria? Picture down below. Assad. Okay, they were Alawites. They were neither Shia nor Sunni. Okay, a lot of Syrians are Alawites. And then the Druze are really cool. This is the picture of the Druze who have those white hats. They always dress in black with white on top, and the women wear black and white veils. And they're pretty cool people. That's in Syria, Lebanon, and the Golan Heights of Israel. You might have heard of them or seen the amazing movie called The Syrian Bride. But there are people who are really Socratic. They're really into like Greek philosophy, and so they've really toned down Islam. It's more philosophical and pretty. It kind of feels like um, the Freemasons because they have a lot of secretive rites and stuff. But people that you can't really become one. It's just the people are born into it, and so it's an interesting sect who they tend to be really loyal to whatever country they're living in. And okay, and there's lots of others. You might think of the Baha'i religion. You might have heard of that. They came from Iran and ended up centered in the Holy Land in Galilee, in Haifa. Um, and then you probably heard of Sufi mysticism, which we could most of them are Sunni. Again, it's a real ancient mysticism within Sunni Islam. It's a very peaceful, peace-loving, and focused on prayer and dance and arts, poetry, and really popular for the farther you get east. Okay, in the West, this is really interesting demographics, huh? Look at Europe. Look at how many uh, Muslims are in France. Can you believe that? Wow. England. Okay, and they're really concentrated in certain parts. For example, there's certain parts of Paris's um, the outskirts that are totally Muslim. Can you imagine? And Texas, wow, 2%, that's a lot, right? Detroit metro area, 350,000. Okay, and also some of this culture that resists Western materialism and modernism and progress, and that's as much of a religious as it is a cultural thing. That if you don't have reason at the heart of your religion, well, you want to resist something that resists the progress that's based on reason. But some of it's also um, the invasion of, I think, what for us is hard about secular culture as well, and its values and sexual revolution, or is it even just not being able to educate our kids well because of the invasion of, or maybe it's also our obsession with the progress that is kind of the opposite of believing in transcendence, is seeing the future as only what's here below and not what in transcendental values. So I think there's something that we kind of share in some of the resistance of progress. At the same time, what has brought them so close to our modern progressive world is oil, right? Really, all these countries in the Middle East are so advanced because they took advantage of the oil. Okay, maybe rightfully so, but they happen to have all this money, and therefore they have at least a facade of Western progress, even though they might not have the underpinnings of that, right? This, by the way, is McDonald's written in Arabic characters. least we have one. We skipped the Hebrew this lesson, so we'll learn McDonald's in Arabic. Okay, and the question of women. I think this is so hard to just see the limit on women's rights. And this is Khulud, who was a teacher in Hebron. Hebron's just south of Bethlehem, where the patriarchs and matriarchs are buried. Khulud really, she keeps saying, I want to be a Christian girl. I want to, tell me about what it means to be Christian. But she's so isolated. Even though she's not married, it's really hard for her to see any path out, and it's dangerous for her to meet with other Christians. So I'm trying to put her in touch with some priests I know who might go out of their way to try to work with her. But the woman has a real hard time having freedom and being her own person in Islam. And I think there's a respect for femininity and motherhood, of course, in Islam, and respect for the modesty of women. On one hand, that maybe is attractive to some women, uh, but really, women's rights is like zero. So, and you've heard about divorce laws and stuff like that. Really, the man can do what he wants, and in certain strands of Islam, can have several marriages, and the women can't say much about it. And I've been reading some novels about Islam in Cairo, and it's just crazy how the woman she lives in her home and doesn't go out, and would only go out to grocery shop or something, and really the man has complete control over the woman. And so I want to get to some of these books that I recommend reading. Speaking of feminism, one of the biggest enemies of Islam, they say, or enemies of what Islam is against the woman, someone who's very outspoken against the woman's genital mutilation, for example, and says it's terrible that Europe is permitting Muslims to do this on European soil or American soil, closing their eyes to this, is Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And I think her story, this is her story, and I totally recommend to read because it takes you through many different Muslim countries. She's from Somali and lived in Nigeria and lived in Saudi Arabia and then immigrated to Holland, and in her 30s became a member of the Dutch parliament as they were looking for somebody who understood the immigration issues. And she was somebody who really bought into European values. And so I don't know, kind of don't think she's become a Christian yet. Maybe she's just, in fact, she is. But she really wants to speak in an objective way to Islam and the way it denigrates the human person, in her opinion. But the different path she has, the way she describes growing up in Islam, she describes very beautiful elements of it in a diversity of the different places. Nomadic Islam of her grandmother, for example, and then the political battles of her father, who was exiled from Somali, and then the family was left. And she talks about how her mother, as they wanted to be better Muslims and were discovering that more in Nigeria, wanted to move to Saudi Arabia and go to the heart. And she describes traveling with her mother and how it was just a funny thing, her mother having to fly into um, Saudi Arabia and into a place where women would never be in public without an escort, a man's escort, and how kind of scary it was waiting to meet their uncle there at the airport in Saudi Arabia. So just some of that world to see through somebody's eyes who has an objective view on it today, critical view on it today. Really recommend it. And she has all kinds of things that are on YouTube or wherever, and websites as well. This is the really moving book about jihad that I described, The Sword and the Scimitar. And pay attention to the author, because there's other sword and scimitar books out there that aren't this same book. Heart of Islam is written by a graduate of Harvard. It's a really beautiful description, really appealing description of Islam. And maybe hiding some of this question of nature of God and of jihad that we would like to talk about. Maybe he's talking more about jihad as the inner struggle. And yes, okay, there's So it's a beautiful presentation. If you want to convert to Islam, I recommend this book. If you want to help others, no, but it's nice to read that side of it, right? And to realize there's a lot of the Western world that's really convinced in the beauty of Islam, and we don't. Of course, anywhere the human person is, you'll also find beauty in culture. So, but enduring values for humanity is the subtitle, right? But I think it's a very well written book, and it talks about a lot of the basics, nuts and bolts of Islam. And then for those on Zoom, you see it. For those up here, the slide didn't update. But there's another book you can write down the name, or you have it on your handout. My 1001 Days. I was so inspired by this autobiography of Queen Farah that I've mentioned in homilies and stuff. And so it's a long book that's written very fluid, beautiful English. And to discover Iran through her eyes and to have her tell the story and some of the basics of what Persian and Iranian culture is like, I thought it was beautiful and inspiring. And also her witness of how she lost everything. She and her husband really said we shouldn't fight our own people. We shouldn't take goods and be accused of robbing from our people. They really had this beautiful idea, I think, of monarchy and kingship as an element that can you defend a country and unite a country against the outside elements, but also that can promote democratic values within a society. So I think sometimes we have our ideas of what monarchy has to be, but when you see something like this, you see, okay, well, there's traditions of monarchy that maybe I didn't imagine in the vision that Farah and her husband had. And the tragic ways, I think that politics got mixed up and people who wanted too much democracy than was ready at the time, and all the different factors of oil interests and of communism that were putting the pressure on them, and after they had gotten out of the influence of the British, because America kind of filled in this also pressure upon their industry. And I think an interesting book to complement that is a book called Taliban, and I'll look for the author. I'll try to mention that in the email because there's a journalist who wrote a book called Taliban that tells the story also of how did these guys, like what brought them this extreme idea of Islam that founded Al Qaeda, and how did they get armed? Well, they got armed because America was arming them against the Soviets, right? The Soviets were invading Iran, and we wanted Afghans, Pakistan to fight against them. So we armed them, and they ended up using those arms, of course, in other ways. So I'm sorry, it's so much info. Anybody want to make any? I'm going to stop the recording. Thanks a lot for those who are watching the recording. I encourage you to follow up, and I'll put some things in the description as far as links and titles. And God bless you all. Questions, comments? I've got the 5:15 mass, so I can't stay more than 5 minutes, but yeah.
Another, after 1680, there's a book called What Went Wrong
What went wrong?
by Bernard Lewis, who
Bernard Lewis.
Yeah, he was a big policy guy with the Bush administration and convinced them that invading Iraq was a good idea. Not. Interestingly, 25% of the world population has produced 3 Nobel Prize winners, all who were working outside of the Muslim world. A fractional percent of all patents issued, couple percent, and very, very few non-religious books.
Yeah.
They owned civilization during what in Europe is sometimes called the Dark Ages. They studied science, they studied...
And this was a very Persian and Iraqi-based learning, right?
They had street lights in Baghdad in the 10th century. Guys went around. And now there's a lot, and about 13 Muslim, when I was in college 30 years ago, it's about 13 Muslim, 13 Muslim converts for every Christian convert.
Yeah. And
that, as far as I know, still going on today.
Yes. Which is why I think it's important to be informed and I think this should challenge us to say, well, why don't we have a culture that's inspiring conversion and family life or whatever it is that's attracting, or hospitality. But But yeah, I think it's good to note the real different worlds of Sunni Saudi Arabia, where Islam came from and where it's centered. That's in some ways the heart of Islam, but they converted peoples who were very sophisticated. So the Persian Iraqi peoples was heart of civilization that the Islamic religion conquered. So there's still something, and that's what gives me so much hope for Iraq and for Iran, is that the people at the heart are sophisticated people and different from the nomad origins of Islam. That's some way simplistic, right? But we can hope.
What do you factor? What do you think makes it so attractive? That it's the fastest growing religion in the world.
Yeah, well, I think we haven't had, we are a religion that has had missionary expansion times, and what was different in those times? I think that why are Christians afraid? Why have cultures of fear? Do Christians really believe in eternal life anymore? And then do we know what it's like to really walk with Jesus and become a disciple? Do we really believe in the Trinity? Are we basically monotheists who have a name of Christian and Trinitarian? Do we really believe? I think there's something very challenging, very deep about Trinity that isn't very simple to accept. To accept one God, great. To accept that there's a Trinity, wow, there's something really deep there. To accept that Christ was truly God, truly man, those are dogmas that are hard to accept. And when we've accepted them without wrestling with them, why would, we wouldn't even want to share them because we'd feel like it's too complicated. Where when you realize the fact that Christ is truly God who became man, and the fact that there is Trinity, this leads us to a vision of eternity and of life that is truly based on love and relationship. So for me, we have everything in our religion, but it's hard. I think we need to wrestle with that, and I think a lot of Christians aren't truly educated in the Christian faith. I don't know, and they certainly don't have what there's a professor at Notre Dame who had a class called A Faith to Die For. Why were there so many ages where Christians were ready to die for their faith? And today certainly isn't one of those, at least in the West. There's other places. So I think we need a teaching like this should challenge us to say there aren't real fundamental reasons why Christianity shouldn't be spreading faster than Islam and why Muslims shouldn't be attracted. And their attraction should begin right inside their hearts and minds, right? In their reason. Yeah.
They still believe, what is their testimony in eternity? Is it 72 virgins? What about what is their goal in life other than driving?
Well, they're convinced that there is reward in heaven. They're convinced that there is heaven and convinced that there's reward in heaven. I think, and so this is something that where Muslim young people are, the martyrdom is, they're ready to go to war and they promote in their societies that their mom should be proud that they died for the faith. So I think it's a simplistic notion of heaven, but they're sure that it's there and they're sure that it's rewarding, right?
What are those that are loving people who don't want to fight? Who's their goal? Do they still have
Sure. No, I think there's plenty of striving in their religion for goodness and for what is family values, for work. I think there's meaning to life, but they certainly have a clearer concept, even though it's simplistic, that there's reward and not just reward for virtue, but reward for fighting for their faith. And yeah, Rex.
Well, when you look at Christianity, you look at Islam, let's face it, they have the man. You lift them out, they treat the man with respect, and that goes across their whole society. Hey, our society is like men.
There's certainly clear leadership, yeah.
But there is one thing we have to, really realize, I think as a society, is that, what comes with Islam is Sharia, and it's a reality when they come in and take an area, it's normal. And you see that happening more in Europe right now.
You don't realize what we're getting after they conquer, I think.
Right. It's not how the Constitution and the Bill of Rights of the United States. As a people, we take the host.
I think what I hear Shirley, what she says, immigrants need to have assimilation, integration. I think we need to ask that question as Americans. What does that mean? What are some fundamentals that any American needs to understand, and how will these rub with or should rub if they're not rubbing? I need to conclude there because I need to get to mass. But the Lord be with you. Barakum Allah al-Karu kul shel abul ibn ruchu kudus alilahil wahid. Amen. Those who are here, the first ones, if you could help the room